All right, welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Definitely.
Today we're diving into a case that honestly, it's one of those that really just I don't know, it just gets under your skin. The
Yeah.
crimes of Fred and Rose West.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff, and we're going to be basing this deep dive primarily on the case file episode.
Great episode.
Oh, it is. It's really good. And you guys, our listeners, you're all true crime fans. You get it. This isn't just about like the murders themselves.
Right.
It's about trying to understand how this family, they seem so normal, got away with these awful things for so long. Like, what did people miss? What went wrong? And then there's Rose, her role in all this. That's going to be a big question throughout this whole deep dive, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's fascinating how that normal act, that facade, played such a big part. On the surface, just another family on Cromwell Street, but underneath, a whole different story. This deep dive, it's going to make us think about how appearances can fool you, how little details can actually be huge clues.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got to start somewhere, right? And there's this event that seems small at first, but it's a turning point. This 13-year-old girl, Sarah, she reported her friend's rape to the police.
Right.
But what happened next, you wouldn't believe it.
It really shows you the times back then, the way people thought. Sarah's friend, she told her mom about the assault and the mom. She basically blamed the victim.
No way.
Yeah. Made this awful, callous remark, just dismissed her experience. It shows you the messed up dynamics in that family, how society can silence victims, it enables abusers. But Sarah, she was brave, came forward even without support. That was the first crack in the West's perfect little world.
Wow. It's amazing how one young girl's bravery can unravel something so huge. And speaking of facades, let's talk about 25 Cromwell Street. It became infamous, but back then it was just ordinary. Neighbors even said the Wests were a model family. Can you imagine?
It's like textbook evil hiding in plain sight. Fred, he was known as the handyman type. Helpful, but very private. Never let visitors just wander around his house. Huge red flag looking back. Guarded his home life like he was hiding something dark. Rose, though, she was seen as, well, put together, attractive, focused on their 8 kids.
8 kids. You have to wonder, with all those kids, did social services ever, check in? Were there any signs that something was off?
It's the question that haunts this case, and here's the disturbing part. Police had been to 25 Cromwell Street before, multiple times. Petty stuff, stolen goods, drug issues with lodgers, but they never found anything really incriminating. Like those small crimes were a cover, hiding the real horror inside.
Like they were masters at keeping those two sides separate. The dark side, the outside world never saw it, but eventually it had to come out. The police raid focused on those sexual abuse claims against Fred. It led to this huge confrontation with Rose.
Their reactions were so different. Rose went totally ballistic, kicking, screaming. They had to hold her back. It was this outburst of anger, defiance. Fred, though, he was almost calm. Just denied everything at first. Lies, all lies.
It's interesting because usually abusers, they try to charm their way out, right?
Yeah.
Was Fred doing that, or was he really that clueless?
You see that a lot. It's a way to manipulate. His denial, it was probably calculated, buying time, seeing what he was dealing with, trying to control the story before it got out of hand.
So he was putting on a show for the police, trying to seem innocent. But then things changed when his son Stephen visited him in jail.
That visit, it was pivotal. Fred, he'd been so calm until then, completely lost it in front of Stephen, admitted to some stupid things, even tried to get Stephen to take the blame for some of it. Shows you Fred's need for control, even when he's vulnerable.
Wow, even then he's manipulating, shifting blame, holding on to power somehow. What about Anna Marie, Fred's daughter from his first marriage? She wasn't living at 25 Cromwell Street anymore, but she was still caught up in all this.
Anna Marie's story, it's heartbreaking. It shows how abuse can affect you forever, how hard it is to come forward. Imagine getting this creepy phone call from your stepmother, telling you to keep quiet about stuff that happened years ago, the fear, the manipulation that silenced her for so long.
It's awful. Like Rose was still trying to control things, even from afar. But there was one person who wouldn't be silenced. Detective Constable Hazel Savage. She had a history with the Wests. She dealt with Fred and his first wife years before. How did that affect the investigation?
It gave her a huge advantage. Constable Savage, she wasn't starting from scratch. She knew Fred, knew what he was capable of.
Like having a piece of the puzzle already, right? You can see the bigger picture. And eventually, Anna Marie, even though she was scared, she told Constable Savage everything.
It was incredibly brave of her. Years of sexual abuse, the horrors she described in that cellar at 25 Cromwell Street, the details she gave, the restraints, Rose's involvement. It's a picture of calculated, systematic abuse.
That cellar becomes this symbol of hidden darkness. Just awful things happening, secrets buried. Anne Marie's testimony opened the door to a world nobody was supposed to see. But what about the other kids, the ones still living there? What was their life like?
25 Cromwell Street, it was the opposite of that model family image. The kids lived in fear, under constant control, locked doors, no going outside, always the threat of beatings. They were prisoners in their own home.
It's a chilling reminder that abuse thrives on isolation. The Wests, they controlled their kids' world, kept up their act, made sure nobody knew the truth.
But there was this one incident with Anna Marie that could have changed everything.
A teacher noticed bruising on Anna Marie, reported it. A social worker visited 25 Cromwell Street. But in the end, nothing happened. A classic example of how systems meant to protect kids fail. It's unsettling that a social worker was right there and still didn't see the warning signs. Were there any other missed chances to help those kids? And what about Anna Marie's escape? We'll get into that when we come back for part 2 of our deep dive. Welcome back to this deep dive into Cromwell Street. It's hard to believe that even after Anna Marie got out, after the trial, the worst of it was still hidden. It's like, you know it's coming, but it's still, ugh.
That feeling, you're right on the money. Even with Anna Marie being so brave, justice, it didn't happen right away. Remember, that trial was about the abuse, not murder, and the other kids, they were still terrified of their parents, refused to testify.
So sad how that fear, the manipulation, just kept them silent. It led to the Wests walking free. For a while, it seemed like they got away with it.
Yeah.
But there was this one thing, like a loose end, that wouldn't go away. Heather West, Fred's daughter from his first marriage, gone missing back in '87.
Heather's disappearance, that's the key. All those different stories from Fred and Rose. She ran away, new job, drugs, classic deflection, trying to confuse things, make people suspicious of her. And then there's that awful joke about her being buried under the patio. Just sends chills down your spine.
They were making light of something horrible, trying to make it normal, part of their everyday talk.
Right.
You think that dark humor, was it like a way to deal with the guilt or something worse?
Psychologists, criminologists, they still debate that. Was it coping? A way to numb themselves to what they'd done? Or was it twisted? A way to control the story, even admit to it in this veiled way?
Hard to wrap your head around that.
Yeah.
But whatever the reason, that joke about Heather under the patio, it became almost like a prediction. Because almost a year after they walked free, the police came back to 25 Cromwell Street, search warrant in hand, ready to dig up the garden.
Can you imagine the tension? Detective Constable Hazel Savage, she was determined to find the truth. And when they got there, Rose. She went off, just like before, yelling, cursing. But Fred, he was away working when they started, and when he got back, he was oddly calm.
Him being late, that's weird. Took him almost 3.5 hours to get home. Was he trying to come up with a story? Or was it something about him, his personality, how he always acted?
Definitely suspicious. Maybe he was figuring out what to do, knew they might find something, but think about Fred. Always manipulating, controlling. Maybe he was making them wait for him, the big man in charge, before they could go any further.
Like he was still directing the show, even with everything falling apart. While they were questioning Rose at the house, she's denying everything, even taunting them. Fred, at the station, he confessed. Just like that.
The timing, it's important, shows you how calculated Fred was. Rose is distracting everyone, playing the angry wife, while Fred, he plays his hand. Admits to killing Heather, but of course it was an accident.
It's like clockwork in these cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
The abuser downplaying it, making themselves the victim. What did Fred actually say? How'd the police take it?
He claimed they argued, he got angry, strangled her by accident.
Yeah.
Even went into detail about trying to revive her, which, we've seen before. It's how they deflect blame, make you feel sorry for them.
Trying to seem like this heartbroken dad who made a mistake, but knowing what we know now, hard to believe that.
Exactly. The police weren't buying it either. Fred, he said it was an accident, but his description, it was so detailed. The strangling, the resuscitation, even how he cut up her body. It screamed premeditation, brutality. It contradicted his whole accident story.
So even trying to control things, the details betrayed him. And back at Cromwell Street, they were digging up the garden. What was it like finding all that?
Grim. Just picture it. Men digging in the rain, that smell. Then they found animal bones, made it even creepier, like something bad was coming. And then Professor Bernard Knight, the pathologist, he identified a human femur.
That must have been the moment when everyone knew this wasn't just a missing person anymore. What happened then? Did they find Heather?
That first femur, it wasn't Heather's. Different part of the garden than they expected. Then a second one, also not hers. And that's when Fred, at the station, he drops another bombshell, admits to killing Shirley's mate. That's what he called her.
Shirley's mate.
Chilling how he makes them sound like nobodies. Who was Shirley? How'd she end up with the Wests?
Shirley Robinson's story. It's sadly common in abuse cases. Young, vulnerable, thought the Wests were offering her safety, turned into this twisted three-way relationship. There were pictures of her and Fred, like a couple. She even wrote to her dad, said she wanted to marry Fred. But as she got further along with Fred's baby, she changed, got scared, tried to get away from them.
Like she was realizing the truth. That happy family was all fake, and nobody reported her missing. That shows you how much power, how much fear the Wests had. You're right. They isolated people, controlled them, made it hard to ask for help. And Shirley's story doesn't end there. After they found Heather in the garden, Fred confessed to killing Shirley too. Cut her up, buried her near the back door.
Awful. To do those things. And then just lead the police right to her, like he was in charge, even then.
That need to be in control, that's Fred all over. Even confessing, he's manipulating, shows them where Shirley is, but still says Heather was an accident. Like, he's ranking his victims, saying he's capable of passion, not cold-blooded murder.
Gives you a glimpse inside his head, how he justifies it all, tries to seem innocent. And it wasn't just Shirley. Remember, 3 femurs in the garden. Who was the third one? What did Fred say about her?
The third, that was Allison Chambers. Another troubled teenager. She'd gone to 25 Cromwell Street for help. Fred said she threatened to go to the police, so he strangled her in the car, brought her body back to the house.
It's just, they were real people, with lives, with problems, and the West took advantage. And it's so sad. Allison wrote to her mom, called them a homely family.
That letter, it's tragic. She wanted to belong, feel safe, and that's what drew her in. She had no idea. And her story shows how badly the system failed her. Her family, the care system, even the police. They stopped looking for her when she turned 17, even though she was clearly in danger.
It's a wake-up call. Even when there's signs, the people meant to protect these kids, they can fail. And with Allison, they found a belt around her head. That doesn't sound like an accident.
The belt, it means he planned it, and it was brutal. It proves that Fred's confessions, yeah, they told us something, but they were still a performance. He was still trying to control the story, downplay his part, seem innocent.
So, 3 victims, all young women. They got caught in the West's web, and it ended tragically. But Fred, through it all, he kept saying Rose was innocent. He even called her the perfect mother. Hard to believe that, with everything else we know about her.
That's the big question, right? Fred's version versus the truth. Unfortunately, that case file episode, it ends before Rose's trial. We don't get a definite answer. But everything we've learned, it points to her being more than just a bystander.
It shows you, even in cases that seem open and shut, there's more to the story, questions that stay unanswered. We might never know exactly what Rose did, but the evidence is there. She was violent, she manipulated people, her role in all of it, it's a chilling mystery.
The Cromwell Street case, it's a warning. Don't ignore the signs. Don't believe everything you see. What seemed like a small child abuse report, it uncovered this whole mess of lies, manipulation, and cruelty. Evil can hide anywhere, and we have to protect those who can't protect themselves. Hold abusers accountable.
And it shows how sneaky evil is. It grows in the dark, where nobody's watching, hidden behind a mask of normal life. Cromwell Street, it's a story that'll stick with you. It reminds us how dark things can get and how important it is to fight for justice for the victims. Okay, so we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into Cromwell Street. And after everything we've uncovered, there's this one question hanging in the air. What about Rose? Fred, he swore she was innocent, called her the perfect mother. But does that really hold up? I mean, come on.
It's hard to square that image with what we know now, isn't it?
Exactly.
And look, let's not forget, Rose had a history of violence herself. She was convicted back in '73 alongside Fred for attacking their nanny. It wasn't just Fred calling the shots. Rose was capable of some pretty brutal things.
Right, so there's a legal record of her violence. It's not just Fred's word against everyone else's.
Yeah.
Which makes his whole protecting her thing even weirder. Was he being sincere? Or was it just a last-ditch effort to control the narrative, even as everything was falling apart around him?
It's a real head-scratcher, isn't it? Maybe it was some twisted loyalty, or maybe he saw her as like an extension of himself, so defending her was defending his own actions. But as the investigation went on, those cracks in his story, they just got wider. Remember those 99 pornographic videos they found at 25 Cromwell Street?
Oh, yeah, those were huge. Talk about blowing Fred's perfect mother story out of the water.
Yeah.
The video showed her, well, let's just say, engaging in a lot of different sexual acts, sometimes with multiple partners. Some of them, it even seemed like she didn't know she was being filmed. Doesn't exactly scream devoted housewife and mother, does it? Nope, not at all. Those videos totally shattered that carefully constructed image of Rose. Showed a willingness to be involved in some pretty risky, even dangerous stuff. You really have to question what she was capable of.
It makes you wonder if Fred was just projecting, creating this fantasy version of Rose that suited him, but ignoring the reality of who she was and what she did.
Could be. Abusers, they're good at twisting reality to fit their own stories. But it wasn't just the videos. People who knew the West described Rose as controlling, even violent. Some said she'd attacked Fred, and others with knives.
Whoa. So she wasn't afraid to use a weapon on Fred or anyone else. The perfect mother act is really falling apart here.
Remember, abuse is all about power and control. And it looks like Rose was just as good at using those things, at hurting people, as Fred was.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? This couple feeding off each other's darkness, making each other worse, their crimes escalating over time. The question is, was Rose actively involved in the murders themselves? Or was she more like manipulated by Fred under his control? That's the big question, yeah. And unfortunately, the case file episode, it doesn't cover Rose's trial, so we don't have a clear answer. But all the evidence, it suggests she was more than just an innocent bystander.
It's a good reminder that even in cases that seem pretty clear-cut, there's always more to the story. We might never know everything Rose did, but the facts are there. She was violent, she knew how to manipulate people, her part in what happened at 25 Cromwell Street, it's a mystery that still chills you to the bone.
Cromwell Street, this case, it's a warning. Pay attention to the red flags, don't just assume everything's okay. What started as a simple child abuse report, it uncovered this whole nightmare of lies, manipulation, and cruelty. Evil can hide anywhere. We have to protect those who are vulnerable, make sure abusers face consequences.
It shows how insidious evil can be. It grows in the shadows and silence, hidden behind this mask of normality. The Cromwell Street case, it'll stay with you. It reminds us of the darkest parts of human nature and how important it is to fight for justice for the victims. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Cromwell Street case. We hope you found it informative, chilling, and thought-provoking. As always, thanks for listening.